Resident Evil is one of my favorite franchises, but even the best games in the series have at least one area that isn't the greatest. Let's look at the worst section in each game, in my subjective opinion. So starting with RE0, it's already a very divisive game before you get anywhere near the worst part of it. The whole thing where you drop items on the floor instead of using item boxes gets a lot of criticism, and I mean, most of it is justified since it's about as annoying as Ashley screaming. But it actually almost works in the train section. The train is small enough that you can keep track of where everything is. You're splitting Billy and Rebecca across a handful of carriages, solving things from two ends at once. And I gotta say, as someone who really dislikes the item system in this game, I didn't mind it here for whatever reason. Then the train crashes and you end up in the training facility, and that same system starts working against you. The hook shot is the clearest example by far. You pick it up in the train and it needs 2 of your 6 slots, which is 12 total between both characters. And the game still needs it later, long after you have every reason to ditch it and make room. So you drop it somewhere in the facility, an hour passes, then the game needs it again, and now you're backtracking through identical hallways looking for the hook. But that's just one item. The tension with items in most Resident Evil games is deciding what to take out of the item box before you leave the safe room. But in RE0, it's realizing your shotgun shells, healing items, ink ribbons, puzzle items, and giant 2-slot grappling hook are scattered across the floor. At least the train kept everything close enough that dropping things didn't mean you need to spend a ton of time backtracking and searching. The facility is a multi-floor building where every corridor practically looks the same, and if you're like me where you open the map like 2,000 times in a playthrough, it gets very disorienting. There's another issue here. It's just boring to look at, and unfortunately that exact problem comes back a lot in the series. There's also a boss in there, a giant centipede called the Centurion, which grabs Rebecca mid-facility during a puzzle and holds her the entire fight. So you have to defeat it as Billy alone while she sits in a centipede's arms waiting for this to be over. Kind of funny, but one of the only things the facility does that sticks with you, and by the time you finally get out, the feeling is just relief. Overall, I don't think this is the worst area by its actual design. It has your standard find the item puzzle and actually a decent amount of enemy variety, but RE0 is honestly probably my least favorite mainline RE game, even though I don't think it's a bad game, but this was just maybe one of the most frustrating sections I've played in the series. And now before I continue, I'm going to make a video of this on the best area in every Resident Evil game, so subscribe so you get notified on that. Plus I have a bunch of other Resident Evil videos like this. The Spencer Mansion is one of the best locations in the whole series, and RE1 is basically that location for most of its runtime. You spend the whole time learning it, which doors are locked, which rooms seem like dead ends on the first visit, where everything connects. Every backtracking trip seems to add something, which is part of what makes the design so fantastic, and the reason the original and its remake are a lot of people's favorite in the series. Then you go underground if the game leaves all that behind. The underground lab is the last major area before the tyrant fight on the helipad, and the main thing you're doing there is feeding the MO disc you've collected into lab terminals to get passcodes, and using those passcodes to unlock a cell. And in the mansion, fetching an item usually meant unlocking something new because the building actually changed around you, but in the lab you're walking from one gray room to the next, inserting discs into machines, and the space never feels like it's opening up the way the mansion did. There's also a new enemy here called the Chimera, which is a human fly hybrid that crawls through the ceiling and drops down into you, and it kind of stops being alarming like 2 encounters in, just because they become expected. I feel like the lab loses me because there's almost nothing left to uncover, like right at the end of the game that I've been doing exactly that for hours, and it kind of just misses the mark on what makes the Spencer Mansion so great, where it feels like an actual place, like sort of like a maze, but lab just doesn't really do it for me. Like with the Spencer Mansion, the Raccoon Police Department in RE2 is one of the best locations in survival horror. I had it as the biggest strength for Resident Evil 2 in this video, but anyway, like with the Spencer Mansion, everything just connects, like over the course of several hours, or less if you're a speedrunner like me. It all just connects really well with shortcuts opening up, every key opening a door that loops back somewhere familiar. Like the whole place just feels rewarding, and most people who played it years ago can still map it from memory. Then you leave it and go underground again, and the sewers just don't have the same magic, and it's not that they're broken or anything. Like they've still got split routes and Ada and Sherry moments and gross monsters and giant alligator sequence that feels like the game remembered it was trying to be ridiculous. It's just that compared to the RPD, all of it feels more like connective tissue than a place with its own identity. You go from somewhere every single door feels like it matters to a stretch that mostly exists to move the story towards the lab. And there's still good moments in there, but I never feel like I'm learning the sewers the way I learned the RPD. Like I'm just passing through them waiting for the game to get back somewhere with more personality. RE3 is basically one long chase sequence. Something is hunting you, and the game makes it feel like he could show up at almost any time. And that's part of what makes RE3 different than RE2. Well, at least the OG versions. Nemesis makes Raccoon City feel hostile, like even more hostile than you would expect running through a city infested with zombies. But I'm gonna go ahead and say that this is a lot scarier than the typical monsters you see. And the areas kind of follow the same format as RE2 in a lot of ways, but there's a little more variety here. It doesn't really have that one central location like the RPD or the Spencer Mansion, like you're going into the city more here. But I'd say the worst part here is the park. The game works because even when Nemesis isn't on screen, the game's already trained you to think he could be. That fear is just doing a lot of the work in the game, but the park kind of removes that. Like it's not just slower, well, it is slower in a game where the best parts are built around never fully relaxing. Places the pressure is a gear puzzle, a graveyard, and a worm boss. The gear puzzle has you arranging gears to drain a flooded fountain and open the sewers below. The giant worm boss is pretty much the only notable thing here. When they made the remake in 2020, the park was basically gone, and the Gravedigger was removed entirely. The remake gets criticized a lot for what it left out, and pretty fairly, but the park was not exactly the cut that defined all that backlash. So I'm actually writing this shortly after we got the Code Veronica remake announcement, and I'm super excited for that. I think Code Veronica is a very underrated game, and it does a lot of things that no other RE game tries. You go from a prison island to an Antarctic base. Alexia Ashford is one of the series' most interesting villains, and the moment Chris and Claire finally find each other is one of the better moments in the series. The game also has the cargo plane tyrant fight, which is one of those moments where a blind playthrough just stops. Late in Claire's Rockford Island stretch, she tries to escape by cargo plane, only for the TO-78 tyrant to board through the hold door. The fight takes place in a cramped cargo bay with an open door on one side. Get knocked too close and Claire goes out the plane instantly. The way to win is to damage it enough to release a cargo crate from its harness, sending it crashing into the tyrant and knocking it out the door. There's BOW gas rounds available before that makes this significantly more manageable. Easy for a first-time player to miss though. The high damage ammo that just makes this a little easier is burned through earlier without realizing you need it here. So you can arrive with whatever you happen to carry, keep getting knocked out through the cargo door, and just have no idea what you're doing wrong. It's not hard in an interesting way, it's just hard in the I should have saved the grenade launcher ammo 45 minutes ago kind of way. It feels like if you don't have what you need here, then you're just kind of screwed. Now, if you don't think the cargo plane fight should count, because I know a lot of people do like this, I know it's not like a full area or anything, my other pick would be Chris's stretch through the Antarctic base. Right after Chris and Claire finally find each other, which I already think is one of the better moments in the game, game splits them right back up and hands you Chris by himself, walking through a lot of the same exact hallways Claire just got through, the same bandersnatches grabbing you out of the vents, same general layout, just Chris's slightly different moveset and whatever key item the game needs you to track down this time. The cargo plane fight is hard because of a decision you made an hour earlier, but this is just nothing new, which is its own kind of bad. Things do pick up once Alexia's tower shows up, but the stretch to get there is just so boring. After you finally complete the island, you'll probably want to get some rest, and thanks to the sponsor of this video, Mana Sleep, you might just be able to get a better night's sleep. I've talked about Mana before, but I generally use their stuff every night. It's the summer, so sometimes it's even at night, it's still hot, so the Mana Cool Sleep Mask has been my go-to because not only does it give you full blackout without that annoying pressure directly on your eyes, but it can also help cool you down, and the eye cups are adjustable too. They also sent over the Mana Pro Sleep Mask, which is great as well and feels very premium. And besides just sleep mask, they also sent over the white noise machine, and I've just been using the rain sound effects almost every night. It's just very peaceful and helps me sleep after working on Resident Evil videos until like 2 a.m. So if you want better sleep, check out Mana Sleep using the link in the description and use code DOMAINY for 10% off. Huge thanks to Mana Sleep for sponsoring this video.
No thanks, bro.
The village opening, the castle, the island. Every replay I do, I dread having to deal with the final stretch on the island. The village throws you into this open, chaotic encounter and has you exploring and progressing through areas that never really feel like they drag. The castle builds on that for the most part. I mean, yeah, not everything is perfect, but for the most part, it's super fun to explore, take out waves of enemies, and to see whatever ridiculous room the game throws at you next. I don't love the mine sections under the castle, but it's not the worst for me, because at least the game still feels like it has variety. You see, even though RE4 is far from what I would consider to be a scary game, there is survival horror here. You're still managing ammo, trying to control space, deciding when to stand your ground, when to run, when to use a grenade, when to save your shotgun shells. All that's still here. It still plays like a Resident Evil game. It's just a lot more action focused. Then the island is a military compound, and at some point it becomes RE6 before RE6. It's just a lot less methodical. Like, instead of feeling like you're entering these weird spaces and figuring out the best way to survive them, it just starts feeling more like the game is putting you in a combat room after combat room and also slowing things down at the same time, which just kind of feels off. Like, soldiers have shields, stun rods, helmets, mounted guns, rocket launchers, and it's not that these enemies are impossible or anything. It's just a different kind of pressure. And then you have the regenerators, which are actually scary, but those kind of feel like sandwiched in between all of this. Like, RE4 was already an action game before this, but the best parts of RE4 still had that push and pull where you were exploring, getting ambushed, and finding treasure. The island just has less of that, and it kind of just feels like it's a different game at points. I know the island has defenders, and I get why, because the regenerators are incredible, and I like the idea that you use the infrared scope to find and destroy the plaga parasites inside of it. Also, I gotta say, I don't like the boss fight when you fight it. The jet ski escape at the finish, though, is fun. Just getting there is a slog. RE5 has a long list of criticisms, and again, most of them are fair. Even as someone who can enjoy RE5, the Ruins chapter has a co-op puzzle that always comes to mind first. A section where you and your partner pull chains on a series of statues to move staircases through a multi-level room. And it's just so boring in a way the rest of RE5 at least avoids by moving fast. Both players need to pull chains simultaneously on different floors of the same room, and whether you're lined up correctly is unclear. Playing with someone who hasn't done it before means spending a long time working out who needs to be where and which chain does what, because the game doesn't tell you cleanly, and trial and error in something this slow is just awful. In solo, Sheva's AI adds uncertainty to a sequence that already has too much of it. Now, I know this video is about the worst area, and I don't know how much you want to consider this specific part its own area, but I don't know, I've just never been a fan of the ruins as a whole. Like, there's other things here, like the stupid laser puzzle that I hate, so we can even add that onto this. So look, I could point of like half of RE6 and call it a day. Leon's campaign is probably the most bearable of the four, the one that at least feels like it's trying to be a horror game for part of it, maybe a little bit, not really. And it's also worth pointing to where that falls apart most specifically. The catacombs in chapter 3, set in tunnels beneath the Tall Oaks Cathedral. This entire chapter is built around split co-op puzzles where one player holds a lever while the other advances through the door it opens. In practice, that mostly means that one player stands still while the other walks through a door and then swap. There's also a section where an enemy takes the old crank and you have to hunt it down to get progression moving again, which is as exciting as it sounds. Spike traps come out of the floor. The boss is a shark-like BOW that chases Leon through an underground water channel while Helena shoots at it from above, ending in a long QTE of button mashing and thumbstick rotating. The catacombs are RE6's whole design problems in a nutshell. Sure, there's tense moments, but you just get co-op puzzles that don't really add to the game. And I haven't played this game in a few years, but from what I remember, this was the worst. Maybe when I go back to it, it'll change. So let me know in the comments, is there just a worst area in this game than the catacombs? RE7 was my first Resident Evil game, and I played it shortly after release in 2017. Sorry, I know that makes me a LARP or a tourist because I wasn't alive for the first 3 Resident Evil games, and I wasn't playing Resident Evil before I was even in middle school, but this is a game that made me fall in love with the series. I went in knowing basically nothing, and it quickly became one of my favorite games of the generation. The Baker House is a big part of why, because the game is true survival horror. You could walk around without nothing even happening and feel uneasiness. I also remember the part when you finally have to go to the basement. That is legitimately one of the scariest moments in video games for me. But also what adds to that is you just don't feel strong. You're not Leon or Chris or Jill or any sort of trained professional. You're one guy with a history of bad decisions like going to the mansion by yourself. You need to conserve ammo and take your time, and oftentimes just avoid an area until you have more ammo or can get around the mold heads. You never know what's going to be lurking around the other corner, and even if you do, you can't always deal with it. The Baker estate also just connects and feels satisfying to progress through and complete puzzles. And that's really what it is. The Baker House is a real place. You can imagine people eating in that kitchen. Well, maybe we don't have to imagine that because we see it, but it just feels like there's a lot going on here. Ethan even questions in this game who actually builds all these things. So this entire part of the game, whether it's the guest house, the main Baker mansion, the whole part with Marguerite, it's all fantastic. But then you go on a boat and things go wrong and you're playing as Mia. Her inventory resets, she nearly starts empty, picks up a knife shortly after, and her crafting options are much narrower than Ethan, so it just kind of feels like lost progress, which you might say adds to the horror. But then partway through, she finds the P19 machine gun in the captain's cabin, and suddenly she's unloading into crowds of mold heads RE5 style. The ship tries to explain Mia, the connections, what she and Evelyn actually were to each other, and that matters for the lore. The game wants you to take in the backstory while the mechanics keep pushing you somewhere completely different. The ship has atmosphere, but it's just colder metal hallways, stairwells, locked doors, mold heads in corridors. Like, I feel like the house just wants you to learn it, but the ship just wants you to move through. And this is just a common occurrence in the series, especially for RE1 and 2. But I feel like when I'm on the ship, I'm mostly waiting for the game to finish explaining why I'm here, rather than just being so engaged with the gameplay there. You can also make a case for the salt mines too, and honestly, I think the ship and salt mines are basically a package deal. The shift starts on the ship, and the mines are just where you realize it's not coming back. The first time you push past it, like on a replay, especially when you don't care about the lore, it becomes even less interesting. Village was the first Resident Evil I bought brand new on launch day. Like, I was only 18 when this game came out, and I still shelled out $70 for a PS5 copy. That's how much I was hyped for this game. And I know a lot of people don't like Village, and it's not my favorite Resident Evil game, but I really like the variety here. Say what you want about this game, but I think it at least changes things up. Village is kind of 4 different horror games stitched together, which is the best and worst thing about it. The castle has great atmosphere, and the kind of interconnected exploration classic RE does well. House Beneviento definitely drags a little bit on a replay, but I think it's one of the biggest strengths of a first playthrough. And I gotta say, I actually do like the factory. Yes, it feels like a more action-paced game at times, but I've always just thought it was cool. However, Moreau's domain, not to be confused with game domain, I just don't really care for this part of the game. The objective is to restore power to 2 windmills using a crank, then operate a gate control panel to drain the reservoir. Most of the section you spent on a boat in heavy fog, while Moreau transformed into a huge salamander-like creature and stalks you in the water below. The first time the fog and water at least create uncertainty, but I still don't think it's that great. But then on replay, just all of that is gone, and it gets even worse. Regardless of if your first playthrough or not, navigation is just hard to read in the fog, and the actual route is mostly just waiting for the section to turn into the boss fight. I also think by far Moreau himself is just the least interesting of all the 4 lords. I'm probably forgetting things here, and honestly, I haven't played this game in like 4 years now, so I think it actually might be time to go back and see if any of my opinions change. Requiem is actually what made me want to make this video. I was playing through the care center, which I think is one of the best areas in the series. Like, I don't think it's quite on the level of the RPD or even the Baker Mansion, and I know that second part might be controversial, but it's a really good location. Like, are some of the puzzles here stupid? Yes. Like, what do you mean I can't just cut this wristband off this lifeless zombie? If only someone made a video going over the dumbest obstacles in Resident Evil games, am I right? Also, don't even get me started on the Emily puzzle where you have to carry her across the hospital just to read a puzzle you could have solved it yourself in like 30 seconds. But anyway, there's a ton to do here. It feels very interconnected. The progress feels natural. The zombies here are actually scary, especially the singing ones. It actually feels like you're uncovering more about here. This is by far the best part of the game for me. But for the worst area, this is kind of part of the care center area, but I'm going to consider it its own thing since it is its own completely separate part of the game, and that's the basement. So you have to restore power and free Emily, and some utility rooms have electrified water you have to navigate around, and the girl can still appear when lights go out, so you're managing where you pull plugs and when. Enemies are spread across the routes, and the individual pieces are fine. The problem is that the basement rooms don't have enough identity to make those routes interesting, and it just feels like going back and forth with the different joint plugs, trying to figure out what you need to do. It's also very dark here, so it's hard to see. And some people like this. I've seen some people really love the basement center, and if you like that, that's perfectly fine. This is just my opinion on it, but I've never really cared for these kinds of sections. Now, I think that the horror parts of this are actually good. Like, it is scary, but actually playing through it is just kind of dreadful in a bad way for me. And in all transparency, I have not replayed Requiem yet, so things can still change. I know someone's going to comment about the orphanage section, and you know what, that's entirely fair. However, I thought it was at least interesting. After my replay, maybe things will change, but for now, that's what I'm going to go with. The remake expanded the mansion, added the Crimson Head system, and built atmosphere the original hardware just couldn't get close to. I mean, look at these graphics compared to these. It's night and day. It is still one of the best remakes ever made, and the mansion is still one of the best design spaces in survival horror. Now, unlike the remakes that would follow, this is very much a faithful remake. It just feels like an improved version of the original game, rather than being more like a reimagining. So with that being said, a lot of the areas are still relatively similar. I still don't love the labs here, but I'm actually going to go with a different pick here, and it's going to be the caves. So like I said, there were things that were expanded here, and one of them was the caves for whatever reason. They're just stone tunnels with a layout confusing enough that the map stops being as useful as it was. I just don't think it's particularly interesting to look at either, especially since I think the lab at least looks nicer here. Lisa Trevor's pretty much the only reason I remember the stretch at all. She's interesting, I guess. I don't really know how to talk much more about this game without being repetitive, but I just thought this part was annoying. So for full sections, it's still the sewer, but I already talked about that for the OG RE2, so I'm just gonna go with the Sherry section here. Claire's whole story is built around protecting this kid, so giving you a few minutes to actually play as her should make that connection stronger, except the section plays less like Resident Evil and more like a short stealth intermission. You're in the orphanage hiding from Chief Iron, solving a small block puzzle, waiting for the game to just let you be Claire again. And I guess for the first time you play this, it actually works somewhat, but on replays, it's just a slog to get through. Like, once you know where to go and what the puzzle solution is, it's basically like sitting through a long cutscene. And that's what makes it stand out in a game that's otherwise such strong room-to-room survival horror. The RPD in the sewers, and even the nest, all at least ask you to do the basic Resident Evil things and manage space and resources and enemies and routes, and all this has you do is just hiding and solving a toy box. I guess somewhat interesting for the story, but really not much else to say. And like I said, the sewers still aren't great here, and if you don't want to include smaller segments like the Sherry section, that's gonna be my pick for the same reasons as OG RE2. The RE3 remake is a compressed game. The park from the original is gone. The clock tower appears as a backdrop for a Nemesis fight outside it, but the interior, the puzzles, the rooms, the multi-floor layout, all cut. Large chunks of the original city exploration are just gone for most of its runtime, and it's not meaningfully replaced. I also think a lot of areas in this game are pretty weak. I thought the hospital was underwhelming. I didn't care much for the train station, but if I had to pick an absolute worst here, I'd go with Nest 2. It's the final area, and of course it's an underground umbrella lab beneath the hospital. The RE2 remake had a very similar final umbrella lab set up a year earlier, and just did significantly more with it. It had better multi-level layout, more distinct sections worth exploring, better enemy encounters. Nest 2 and RE3 remake is basically a corridor to the Nemesis fight. It's shorter, less interesting to move through, and just doesn't have anything that made RE2's Nest worth the time spent in it. And then the final Nemesis encounter doesn't help. The arena barely gives you room. The fight feels disconnected from the tone of every earlier Nemesis encounter, and on harder difficulties, it just becomes pattern memorization more than any sort of reaction test. The RE4 remake is basically tied with the original for me, depending on the day. Some days the original wins because it's just weirder and more iconic and is a lot more unhinged, and other days I kind of like the remake better just for the gameplay, the combat being deeper. But the one part that I do not like in either is the island. And I know I've tried to not keep the same things for the remakes, but there's nothing else to go with here for me. And yeah, I just want to point out that there is the Ashley section, but that's less so an area, even though I probably could consider it. But I thought it would be more interesting to talk about the island again because it is actually very different here. Leon can stealth through some outdoor sections, the enemy behavior is more reactive, the encounter design is more modern, and of course with there being so much more combat, the knife parry and stagger system just makes it all feel better here. I think it's a better action sequence than in 2005, and the remake fixes a lot of things around it to actually make it play out better. But that's also the problem. Because the remake's combat is heavier, you feel every encounter more, which means when the island locks you into high intensity combat for a long time, it just feels relentless and just loses the pacing of the original game. It's just fight after fight until Sadler arrives and the jet ski appears and you're done. I definitely think the remake island is better, but when you're looking at other areas in this game, I think they're all stronger than this, honestly. Although, a hot take, I'm not the biggest fan of the lake section in the RE4 remake. Don't hate it, but probably would have been my runner-up here. Resident Evil Revelations is an interesting one, because practically the whole game takes place in one big area, which is the Queen Zenobia. And I actually really like Resident Evil Revelations. I literally just replayed it 2 days ago before writing this video. Now, I don't think it's a top Resident Evil game or anything, but it at least feels more like survival horror than 5 and 6. It doesn't have corridors, flooded passages, darkness, and it just feels very unsettling being on this abandoned cruise ship. The views feel right for the environment, and I actually really like how stressful they make this game feel. The Zenobia is a great location. location. And I don't think every part of the Queen Zenobia is the same. Like the one section that ends up getting flooded and you have to find like the crowbar thing to get out of there. Don't love that section. But I'd say my least favorite area here is the Quint and Keith sections. The game keeps cutting away to follow 2 other BSAA agents on land missions, and just every time I feel like the momentum just dies. Like these guys are just fine as side characters, so I don't think the story beats here are particularly interesting. And these encounters are pretty much just walking forward, attacking these BOWs. There's not really anything else that goes into it. I don't think they're horrible, but it's like I just wanted to get back to the Zenobia. And finally, let's talk about Revelations 2. It splits its campaign between Claire and Moira and Barry and Natalia, and most of it actually works pretty well. Barry and Natalia in particular, because Barry can fight, Natalia can sense hidden enemies and change how you read every room. Like you move carefully here and it adds to the game. I feel like when this game is working, it's working really well. But then you have the poison gas mine sections in episode 4, and it just takes that and turns it into a traffic jam. The mines have large areas flooded with poisonous gas, safe zones you move between, and mine carts to push to clear block paths. Gas, pressure, car controls, getting both characters in position, just all needs to happen at the same time, and none of it works when you want it to. The carts are awkward, partner positioning goes from a co-op strength to an obstacle, and the gas timer just creates pressure out of frustration. That's just my problem with the section. It's not the scary kind of stressful, it's the other kind where it's stressful because everything is working against you, and again, it does not look particularly interesting. I think the rest of episode 4 has its moments, but the mine sections don't. And that is what I believe to be the worst area in every Resident Evil game, at least the mainline games plus Revelations. I do want to reiterate that some of these games I haven't played in years, so maybe if I went back, things would change, maybe I missed something. And again, this is just my personal opinions. I'm not trying to say any of these are objective facts, but I want to know your opinions and why. Also, be sure to subscribe because like I said, I'm going to be making a best areas video, plus I have these other videos to check out. Come join my Discord also, and I'll see you next time.